Hi, I'm Solana Booth with Advocates of Sacred, and I want to share more stories with you. I want to share more creation stories with you. As I mentioned before, our creation stories, our Genesis stories, they give us something. They give us a little bit more every time we hear it. So I invite you to learn, which means repetition, which means you might have to hear the same story probably 8 or 9 times to learn the story. And I invite you to learn these creation stories. I invite you to watch or listen or read those creation stories, those tribal Genesis stories. You see, every time we go into a story, we get a little bit more. We get a little bit more of the story, whether it's the meat of the story, the antagonist, the protagonist, the actions of the story. Those stories bring us to a special place inside of us. Those stories activate what we call epigenetics, what Western science calls epigenetics, we call our ancestors. Those stories activate those parts of us. You see, all of us have our ancestors with us, whether it's standing before us, standing next to us, or standing behind us. I like to see my ancestors standing in front of me. I like to see them standing in front of me because they've already been here. And all I can see is the backs of them. All I can see is all those parts of them. What I can't see is I can't see my grandchildren's grandchildren. So they're behind me. So I invite you to use that, to employ that for yourself. When you go to meetings, when you go to school, when you go meet with friends or family, I invite you to honor yourself that way. I invite you to honor yourself knowing that your ancestors, even if you never got to meet them or you don't know all their names, that they're with you. And your grandchildren's grandchildren, even if you don't have children, maybe your grandnieces, grandnephews, or relatives that are going to come after you, that they're with you too, because they are. Because you see what happens inside of you, those emotions, those experiences, those feelings, what happens is it gets interpreted, and if it doesn't get expressed, or even when it does get expressed, it gets imprinted. It gets imprinted. And so just like on Mother Earth, there's certain rivers that go to the ocean. There's certain plants that are harvested higher in elevation. There's certain mammals that live in certain regions of the world. There's certain cedar trees that employ and occupy space for us as rememberers and teachers. There's certain parts on your body that have all those imprints, that have all those experiences. You see, that's why when you learn something new, like riding a bike or learning how to swim or learning how to cook, it feels like you've done it before. It feels familiar. It feels familiar because it is. Because you're not the first one to do it. Because thankfully, you're here. Your ancestors wanted you to be here. They thought about you in a certain way. And guess what? That means that your legacy is in the making. Your Genesis, your creation story is in the making. And so the point of sharing these Genesis, sharing these creation stories is to remind you that it's important that your Genesis, your creation story is important. So here are some examples. Here are some examples of creation stories. This creation story in particular is going to be a little bit more charged emotionally. This creation story might cause some saddening or maddening feelings. So I would advise this creation story to be shared with, children at least 8 or 9 and older. However, if younger children want to watch this, they can. There's no cuss words. It's just the content of this story is pretty mature. The content and the metaphors in this story, the teachings of this story, is usually for more mature people, and that's the thing about storytelling is storytelling was here before prisons, before mental health institutions, before counseling, before wars, world wars. Before those things, we had storytelling to remind us and kind of check ourselves, to kind of help facilitate our own healing, our own relationships inside of us. You see, when we go into a story, it's not just us that gets to go in there, it's our ancestors. It's our ones that haven't been here yet. It's all of us collectively going into that story. And here's your invitation to come into this story. This story was shared by Elaine Grinnell, and it's the whale story. So, long, long ago, as a change maker was creating Earth, as a change maker was putting humans in certain parts of the world, as a change maker was allowing certain relationships to happen, and human beings, we were operating a certain way. The change maker went back and stood there and looked at his creation, looked at their people, looked at their animals, looked at their swimmers, looked at the laws and the light and day and the day and night, and looked at all these different ways that the world was working as, looked at all these protocols that were just naturally happening, and knew and trusted that throughout the humans relating to the animals, and the animals related to the wingeds, and the wingeds to the swimmers, and the humans to the swimmers, and the wingeds, and Mother Earth like that, just kind of trusted that they would continue to collaborate, that they would continue to share with each other throughout their learning about each other, that he was focusing on this one village, and this one village, this is taking place on the northwest coast. So right out here by the ocean, right out here by Washington area, probably Lower Elwha, maybe as far north as Macaw territories, just westernest part of Washington state. And so these people, to live out here, to live on the coast, you have to have certain gear on. You have to protect your shins if you're in the mountain. You have to have hats to protect you from not just the sun during the day, but from the rain. You have to have things on you so that you can collaborate better with Mother Earth, so you can be more productive in your family, in your village. And so the people there in this village, they had two of the most amazing beings among them. They had this basket weaver. This basket weaver was like, she was phenomenal. This basket weaver, hat weaver, blanket weaver, master weaver, she was amazing. People knew that this was the weaver of the people. They knew that. They knew that this weaver could go to cedar and they could harvest cedar and strip cedar, and they could process cedar, have it drying, weaving, sharing stories, listening to stories. They knew that if they brought this weaver a bundle of cedar bark, that this weaver could have a hat made that night, and probably more. You see, this master weaver was so good. Everyone depended on her. They depended on her fast little fingers. They depended on her to weave them, their diapers, their hats, their baskets, their clothes. She had such a big responsibility for these people. At some point, they began to feel a little bit saddened, a little bit not discouraged, but something similar for this weaver, because they thought, oh my gosh, she doesn't have anybody. We need to find her somebody to marry. So they just thought she was so wonderful, and she was a master weaver, that they wanted her to be with somebody. They wanted somebody to take care of her, to house her, so they could have babies is mostly what the people wanted. They wanted her to produce more master weavers, really is ultimately what they were asking for. Anyways, there was somebody there in the village, in the same village, that was a master hunter, gatherer, pulled a canoe like nobody's business. Like when he sat at the back of the canoe pulling water, the rest of the canoe was out of the water. He was so big. He was so strong. He could pull water fast. He knew where the fish were. He knew how to get the halibut at the bottom of fathoms and fathoms of water. He knew how to hunt. He can pack a whole elk. He was a pretty strong, physically strong being. He was also a big person. He was also a big, tall, strong person that some of the villagers were a little bit intimidated. They were a little bit intimidated, so that when this big, strong being, hunter-gatherer person would approach them, they kind of like positioned themselves and postured to like not fall, to like not be wavering around, because he was so big, he was so strong. He had such a big voice too. I'm not going to try to imitate his big voice, but Longhouse voice probably came from him. Longhouse, big voice, probably came from him. He was so big and strong. So the villagers, remember, they wanted more master weavers, and now watching this person, they wanted more of him too. They wanted more strong, big hunter-gatherer, provider people. So they got those two together. They got those two together in hopes that they would get married, in hopes that they would reproduce more people for them, more successors, more caretakers, more weavers, more providers, because that's what happens. They already knew at that time that what's in you will be passed on. They already figured that out. So the changemaker was happy to see all this happening. The changemaker just kind of sat back and watched all this happen. So pretty soon, the master weaver and the big hunter-gatherer, they were married. They were married and they lived together in the same lodge. Only back then we lived with our family members. We lived with what we call extended family. So a few aunties and cousins and grandparents, they all lived in the same lodge. And so this master weaver, her job and her role was to not only weave baskets and hats and diapers and clothes for the people of the village, but now her priority was for the house. Her priority was to keep everyone in the house with a new hat, with new baskets, with new gear, and take orders of the community and provide meals for the house. So now she got to put her cape on, get her digging stick, and go to the ocean, go to where the low tide was first thing in the morning to get the food. You see, when the tide is low, the table's set. She knew that. Everyone knew that. So that was her first job of every day, was to go out at the first low tide and gather all that food so she can prepare the meals for the evening. But you see, the big hunter-gatherer, her husband, he still had a big voice in his own house. That when he would come to the table, he would kind of hit the table very loudly and ask her, "Hey woman, how was your day?" And everyone at the table, including his own family, kind of shuddered and their posture kind of like closed in as if to protect their heart. She was so sweet. And by sweet, I mean so soft-spoken that when he would hit the table, she would kind of jump and close, position her shoulders to cover her heart. And she would look down and she would say very quietly, "Yes, it was good today. It was good. Thank you." And he would get louder and he would get louder and he would say, "What did you do today, woman?" And he would hit the table again. And everyone else at the table, they were just used to it. They were just used to his big, strong voice, him hitting the table really hard. And they were used to seeing her kind of shudder down and cover her heart and talk even quieter. She must have felt like if she talked quieter, that he wouldn't talk so loud. Sometimes we do that. Sometimes when we talk really quietly, we want you to come in closer, but he didn't do that. And so she would say, "Well, I put my cape on and I put my hat on and I grabbed my digging stick and I went to the low tide and I gathered all this food on the table and I prepared all this food on the table for everyone, for our family. And then I made 3 hats today." And then that was it. She would not talk anymore after that. That was it. So then that was good enough for him. And everyone else at the table was just glad that he quit asking questions. They were just glad that he quit hitting the table so hard. And so every day, this was their routine. Every day she would get her digging stick and put her cape on and put her hat on and go get food for the family. Every day she would make her hats and her baskets and her gear for the family and for the community. Every day he would go fishing. He would go hunting. He would come back with loads in the canoe. He would come back with lots of meat for the family and the community. So every day they both provided security and abundance of wealth and love for the family, for the people. Until one day she was at the low tide. She was at the low tide digging for clams and foraging for the food for the family for that night. and it was still a little bit dark. Sometimes low tides are still dark times in the morning. Sometimes it's so early the sun hasn't come up yet. It was still dark that she felt something. She felt something getting closer and closer to her. And I get my drum out. And what she felt was, she felt her song. She felt her song coming. She was familiar with this song coming. She was so familiar that she had words to it. She had vocables to this song coming. Only this time that her song was coming, because it wasn't the first time, the song that her song was coming, she began to sing it. She began to sing her song, and she was walking to where the water met the shore. She was walking to where the water met the shore, that the tide was coming onto shore. And it wasn't only that, it was like a little bit deeper. Like, it's almost like her song was drawing her to that spot on where the water met the shore, and it was deeper. So she's walking and singing. Hey, hey, yo. And she heard him. She heard the killer whale, the blackfish. She heard him. Gispudawada, the killer whale. She heard, hey, hey, yo. She heard him getting closer and closer. She felt the water almost touch her that time. She went to that exact spot that her song called her to stand. She went to that exact spot where killer whale came right up to her. Killer whale came right up to her, and she began to pet him and feel him. And in that moment, she was still singing her song. Hi-yo, hi-hi-yo. And she's petting him and singing her song. And she knew so much in that moment. She knew that that's her family. She knew that's where she came from. She can feel all of that. Singing her song and putting her hands on that killer whale, she could feel all of that. She felt Gispudawada in her body. She felt everything. It's almost like she got re-energized. It's almost like she woke up. She woke up, singing her song, petting her family member. She can feel right there in that spot, right there on the beach. So finally she left her relative. Finally she went back home. She prepared the table. She did her hats and her baskets that day, only she did double. Remember, she had more energy from her song, from meeting her relative like that. She did double. And here comes her husband, and everyone's sitting at the table as usual. He hits the table really loud and says, "What did you do today, woman?" Only this time, everyone jumped, and everyone's shoulders kind of positioned to cover their heart except hers. Except this time, she tilted her hat back a little bit, and she looked straight at him in the eyes. She looked straight at him in the eyes and said, "I put on my cape, and I went to the beach, and I gathered all this food for everyone to enjoy tonight. I made 6 baskets and 4 hats tonight. I made a ton of diapers tonight for the people, for our family, for the community. That's what I did. What did you do?" And the people at the table, they had never seen her talk louder than a whisper. They never seen her stand up so straight and respond to her husband. Her husband felt things he'd never felt in his whole life. He felt things he never saw anyone else feel. Actually, I take that back. He did see people feel this, but he never felt it. So he felt offended. He felt betrayed. He felt embarrassed, humiliated, ashamed, guilty. He felt all these weird things he'd never felt before in his whole life. He was appalled. He was appalled that his wife wasn't shrinking down. He was appalled that his wife used a longhouse voice of her own. He was appalled that she did so much work, because that day he didn't do a whole lot of work. He didn't bring a whole animal home. He brought home some salmon for the community, but he didn't bring as much home as he wanted. So he was actually a little bit embarrassed that she got so much done. And she's looking at him in the eyes and talking to him loudly. So all those embarrassing and humiliating feelings that he had that he never felt caused him to feel bad. caused him to feel so bad, he couldn't not feel bad. That night at bedtime, he stayed awake feeling bad. That morning, the next day, he still felt bad. So he knew something has to be done. So he went about his day feeling bad. She went about her day as usual, only this time she started singing her song from the moment she put her cape on, from the moment she put her hat on and walked to the low tide singing, He-hi-yo. Right away, he came, right away, she can feel him coming. The blackfish, the Gisburawada, the killer whale. Oh, she could feel him coming right away. So she quickly walked to that special spot on the beach where the water met the earth, where the water met the sand. She quickly positioned herself singing, and she already had her hand out, ready to pet him, ready to say, hi, I love you. Hi, thank you. Thank you for feeding me. What can I give you? And she just kept singing, and she felt like she was feeding him her song. She felt like she was receiving love and giving love to her relative, to her family like that. She was even happy. She was even proud. She was all these feelings that she had never quite felt. She felt like she was at the surface of those feelings before. She had a love for this killer whale, for this blackfish, for this Gisburawada she hadn't felt ever. For her husband, she had love. For her family, she had love. For her community, she had connection, but not all in one, not in this way. So that evening, for dinner, she had made 10 baskets and 5 cedar hats and plenty of diapers and capes for the people of the community, for her family. She was so proud. She had lots of food on the table. She even had some berries on the table. She even had other medicines, other plants on the table for her family to feast on. She was so proud. All she could have in her mind and her thoughts and her vision was her killer whale, was her song. It's almost like she kind of had this dance to her during dinner. So her husband comes, hits the table, and asks, "What did you do today, woman?" Everyone else kind of shudders as usual. And she stands up straight, looks at him in the eye, and says, "I made 10 cedar hats. I made 5 baskets. I made lots more diapers. And you can see the new capes that we're wearing at the table. I made you one too. I had a great day today. There's lots of food for us to eat. I hope you enjoy it. I hope it makes you feel good." And she was just smiling and staring at him. And he'd never seen that look on her face before. He never felt any of that before. Then she sat down. And when she sat down, the people around the table, they felt a good feeling. They felt like a comforting feeling. They were proud to have her stand there and say all those things to her husband, that their shoulders relaxed, that their posture got more comfortable at the table. Only this time, he didn't feel any better. He felt worse than bad. He felt so much worse than bad that he stayed awake all night again. And the next morning, he followed her. The next morning, he followed her. He watched her put a cape on. He watched her grab her digging stick. He watched her put her hat on, and he followed her closely. He followed, and he listened to that song. And in his heart, as he was following her, he was getting more mad. He was getting more mad because that's his wife, and she's singing the song he never heard. And so now he's trying to learn the song as he's following her, and he watches her go to that special place where the water meets the tide, where the water hits the sand, where it's deep, and he watches that whale. And he watches her sing and pet him. He can see the energy. It's like there's a glow over her and the whale. He could see all of that, and he's getting more mad. He's getting more not good. Now he's worse than worse. In the beginning, he felt bad, but now he feels terrible. Now he feels awful. Now he has feelings of jealousy or envy that he's never felt in his life. He's only felt anxious. He's only been humiliated, embarrassed, and he felt bad. Now he feels all these other feelings against his wife, against that whale. He's never felt any of those. He knows the water. He's seen those before. He knows all of that. That's his wife. So now, Later that night, at dinner, same thing. What did you do today, woman? And he's looking at her straight in the face, and he's waiting for her to stand up. And she answers him as usual. She answers him proudly and loudly and smiling at him. And it looks as if she loves even more. And he's watching her beam this love, this beautiful energy that he saw emulating at the beach that morning. He's looking at his family look at her, and they're looking at her with love. And he's noticing all these things. He's noticing everyone's posture when she's talking. He's noticing their engagement with her as she's talking. He's noticing how she's unmatched right now. She made all these blankets today, all these hats. He's noticing the beautiful food on the table. He's noticing all of that. What he does notice too is his plan. As she's talking right away, he's planning what to do the next day. He's planning exactly what to do. So right before low tide, right before that special moment that she gets up, he decides to get up before her. He decides to get up and puts her cape on. He puts her hat on. He grabs her digging stick, and he starts walking to where that special part is on the beach. He starts walking to that space, and he's singing, Hi-yo! And he's singing the best he can. You see, he only heard that song once yesterday. He only heard it once, but sure enough, he hears killer whale coming. He could feel the water breaking. He could feel killer whale breaking that water, coming closer. And he positions himself right where his wife stood, petting him. He positions himself, only this time he grabs his knife. So as soon as killer whale comes up, he starts stabbing him, blood everywhere, splattered everywhere. Behind him, he hears, no! Behind him, he could feel his wife running. He could feel the force of her running after him. He's stabbing and stabbing and stabbing this killer whale. And she's running faster and faster towards him. And she falls at her knees. This killer whale is there floating dead, almost like he's waiting to say bye to her. And she starts crying. How could you? How could you? Why would you? And she's singing her song. And she's petting him, and now she's got blood on her hands from her relative, from that blackfish, from that Gisputawata, from that killer whale. And he gets up with his bloody knife, and he's happy, he's proud. Now he feels good again. Now he feels really strong again. He feels like he fixed something. He solved a problem that was his problem. He solved it. He took care of that like that. But she didn't feel that way. She felt betrayed. She felt grief. She felt pain, that she's never felt this kind of pain before. So she starts running. And she starts running, and he tries to grab her by her hair. And she keeps going. She's so fast. She's being chased now by her husband, who stabbed her killer whale, who stabbed her relative. She's being chased. She finally gets to a point of where the water breaks again, where she can dive back in that water again. And she dives back in. And he's right behind her. He's right behind her. He almost got her, and she dove. And he was watching her dive, and he's watching her dive deeper and deeper. And as he's watching her dive deeper, he's watching her transform. He's watching her change into a killer whale. She's changing back into the killer whale. And down below is a pod. Down below is a family, is more killer whales welcoming her. And he could hear that song. He could feel that song and the water breaking as she's diving deeper. He can hear and feel that special song that she was singing. And that is the end of that story. And I know that story brought up a lot of strong emotions and talked about maybe violence and shed light on relationship stuff that happens. And mostly what I'm hoping this story has brought to you as a listener is it brought some connection. It brought some truth. That it matters how we show up. That it matters how we treat people. That it matters that we acknowledge feelings that we've never felt. but it matters the beginning of a relationship, the beginnings of relationships, the beginnings of the killer whale, the blackfish, the Gisbudawara, the weavers, the gatherers, and the hunters. And how do we become to be those? How do we become to be in partnership like that? Hopila, Doixison. Thank you.